And good afternoon, everyone, in this gray, overcast, late October day. So, hey, look, I wanted to talk about something that's very big that's been going on. It's been going on for a week now. Everyone knows what it is. It's Hamas and Israel going after it again. And this isn't new, but this time it's really crazy, way more than before. And I just wanted to give my 2 cents worth about it. If you watch my first video, my introduction, you'll know why I'm choosing to talk about this. This is probably something no other moto vlogger is going to touch. And the reasons are obvious. It's so polarizing. But I wanted to go over it. I wanted to go over, do an SR-71 flyby of the history and kind of, just try to think about where we're at now and is there a different route that can be taken other than just all-out war. So Palestine was inhabited by Canaanites. One of the most famous tribes of the Canaanites was the Philistines. When Israel came in around 1400 BC and began conquering the land for themselves, the Philistines were one of the ones that just never really, they finished off. They fought them, it seems like they kind of hit a stalemate, and then they just started intermarrying and intermingling with them. In 1021 BC, so 400 years later, Saul becomes the first king of Israel, and these tribes are finally united into one kingdom. Again, fast forward to 930 BC, King Rehoboam, Solomon's kid. And Solomon's kid is kind of an idiot, and he doesn't listen to his advisors, and there's a schism in the kingdom that splits 10 tribes to the north, 2 tribes to the south. So the whole point that I'm making here is, so from 400 BC to this point, Israel has conquered. They have made a name for themselves. They have made this their home. So Israel now is a power player in the region. And they would continue to be that way for another couple of hundred years. And while this is going on, the Philistines are still in play. They're not as strong and they're not as powerful as they were, but they're still there. So in 722 BC, Assyrians finally conquer and take captive that entire 10 tribal northern kingdom area. And then from 591 BC to 581, Babylon in 3 successive waves was able to conquer Judah, the southern kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon didn't stop with Israel and Judah. He continued and conquered most of what was called the Levant, which included the Philistines. And this is pretty much where the Philistines meet their end. That took care of the southern kingdom. So now the land of Israel is, for all purposes, desolate. There may have been some trace habitations there, small villages or whatever, but as a kingdom, Israel at that point was done for at least for a while. Next up in the conquering cycle are the Persians, and under, I think it was Cyrus, the Persians allowed a religious freedom in their empire, which gave the Jews, he gave the Jews their pass to go back home. Quite true, many of them did stay in Babylon and in that eastern area, but a great number of them, several tens of thousands, in 3 waves, went back to their homeland and rebuilt the city, the walls, and most importantly, the temple. Go back, Solomon built the first temple, and the temples are important in this region and in this time because They really mark a civilization. It's like planting a flag and saying, this is where all my most important business is and takes place. This is my homeland. You know, temples were that important. And so to have your temple destroyed like Nebuchadnezzar did with Judah, that meant that was no longer their home, that they had been displaced. That was the final thing. Didn't matter who else was there, didn't matter how many small tribal villages survived. The fact that the main kingdom and its temple were gone signified the end. Anyways, Persia, fast forward back to Persia, they allow Israel to rebuild their temple, and so Israel could rightly say they were back. They were back home, they were back on the scene, and, you know, there was a lot of opposition to that. But, you know, whatever, they survived and they continued on. So then next comes Alexander the Great, and this is right around 322 BC. And there's an interesting story there. As he was marching in north to south, of course, Israel is right in his path. But it seems like that the prophets and the priests of Israel at that point understood prophecy well enough to go out, meet Alexander with more or less articles of food and peace and that kind of thing. They're clearly not going to war with him, but more than that, they showed him in their own prophetic writings what he was doing was already known about, and that, you know, obviously he was going to succeed. Apparently he was very impressed with this, and he let them be, went around them and continued onward. And so now we get done with that. 200 BC, the Palestine area falls under the Seleucid Empire. And then finally the big one, 63 BC, the Roman Empire takes control. Israel's now a Roman vassal. Rome gets tired of Israel's rambunctiousness and rebellion, and in 70 AD launches a major offensive and levels the place. It finally ends with the taking of Masada in 73 AD. So in 313, Constantine, the Roman emperor, converts to Christianity, and his mom makes the Palestinian region a Christian stronghold. For the next few hundred years, there's going to be just a massive Christian influence throughout the entire Roman Empire, and specifically in this region. We're talking, this is where monasteries are going to be built, higher centers of education and learning. Anyone that can read of the time is learning to read in a lot of these areas because of the monasteries. And then, you know, there's a dude named Muhammad, starts this religion called Islam. Muslims from 636 to 641 AD go on a crusade. So these Muslim campaigns were very successful. I mean, they literally took the world by surprise. Sticking to Palestine, they held that region for roughly 400 years when the Roman Catholic Pope decides that it's time to take the Holy Land, now called, back from Muslim control. So begin the crusades, the Christian crusades. They're not easy, they're bloody, they're vicious, but they do, you know, reclaim the territory, and it finally ends in a truce. But that was in 1095, in around 1095 when that all happened. And then the Ottoman Empire, another set of Muslims, this time Turkish, they rise up, and from 1516 to 1918, with the exception of a 9-year gap that Egypt had Palestine, literally had that area and they had it Islamified and had it secure for 400 years. So, say what you will, the Muslims at that point, I think they have a claim to say, yeah, this is our home. Remember what I said about temples? During the Islamic Crusades that conquered the area in the first place from its Christian inhabitants, they set up Dome of the Rock and a mosque that I can't pronounce right now. And the importance of temples, again, like I said, that's planting your flag. That's saying this is our home, this is where we belong, we took it, we kept it, it's ours. So, yeah, I mean, they by right of conquest, they have a stake in the game there. But World War I happens. In the case of our conversation, the League of Nations gives the Palestine region over to Great Britain under a thing called the British Mandate. Now, the League of Nations, if you don't know, is the precursor to the United Nations that we have now. And in 1917, there is a thing called the Balfour Document. And the Balfour Document does something radical for the time. It says it gave the British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Needless to say, the Arabs were not excited about that. And from what I read, it was kind of unspoken that the Arab leader felt like he'd made his case and that the British were going to to support his cause and make the entirety of Palestine a free and independent Arab state. That's not what happened. The Balfour letter came out and took the Arabs by surprise. So there was already 1 million Arabs in this area, Muslims in this area, that, they had homes there, they had farms, they had, whatever industry there looked like. This was their home now. This was their home now. And now the world, because remember, Israel isn't a player. They're not a nation. They don't have the power to do anything. It's the rest of the world that's telling them, yeah, you don't get to have that for yourself. We're going to give a chunk of that to the Jews as well. And so the Arabs are just appalled. They're shocked beyond measure. So for 20 years, they're living with this hanging over their head. And so they're watching Jews come in. They're watching Jews come in and buy land. They're watching Jews, slowly come in and start taking things over. And now the Jews, keep in mind, the Jews in their mindset, they're like, this was our home, and it was our home a hell of a lot longer than it was your home, and we want it back. And even though they didn't have the power on themselves to take it back, if the world, the League of Nations, was going to give it back for them, then yeah, they were okay with that. Why wouldn't they be? So, you have civil unrest and civil conflict. Great Britain is getting tired of dealing with this mess, and so they say they're going to let the British Mandate expire. Well, fine. Now, you'll know I said 20 years, and they've been there since 1917, 1922. That should tell you what's happening. World War II is happening. 1939, 1940, etc. And all that did, because of what was going on in Germany, that pushed more Jews out faster from Europe than ever before. Fascism really started becoming in vogue in Europe, and Jewish sentiment was really getting hammered. The Jews had to go someplace, and so they went back to the only place they knew that was their ancestral home from antiquity beyond. They went back to Palestine, and we're talking in the number of tens of thousands now, 50, 60, 70,000. The UN, which was the League of Nations, I said, is now the UN, after World War II, decided they finally had to do something about this. November 1947, I think. UN Resolution 181 drops through the UN General Assembly, passes with a 2/3, proposes a two-state solution. Now, where have we heard that? Oh yeah, in my lifetime, I've heard the two-state solution being brought up and failed like 6 or 7 times. Always, always, always killed by the Arabs. They want no part of the two-state solution. They never have. And when this came out in 1947, and it passed 2/3 of the UN General Assembly to partition off Palestine to where there's an independent Arab state and an independent Jewish state, guess what? The Arabs freaked out, walked out of the General Assembly, wanted no part of it. And I'll put up a map, but they really should have taken the deal, because what the UN was willing to give them was far more than what they have now. And in May 1948, Israel declares itself a free and sovereign nation, a statehood for the Jews. And the immediate response from the Arab nations around them was to attack. And they failed, miserably. Failed so much that the original land that the UN had plotted out for the Arabs was now way less than what it was. And for our conversation, we'll focus back down on Gaza. This little itty-bitty plot of land now called the Gaza Strip. For 20 years, Egypt had control of the Gaza Strip from like 49, after certain boundaries and borders were established between Israel and Egypt, till 1967. So what did they do with their Muslim brothers and sisters that found themselves now suddenly displaced from their homes and refugees of a war that they started and lost? Well, they left them there. They left them there. They wouldn't let them cross the border into Egypt, but it's not just Egypt. Like, no Muslim nation wanted these people. So anyway, so where did I leave off? I left off, 1967. There's a little thing called the 6-Day War there. Several Muslim nations again attack Israel, and again they lose their butts. So I'm going to skip ahead to 1987, because this is really where it's getting relevant now. A little group called Hamas comes along in 1987. They're a radical offshoot from a group called the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a group that comes out of Egypt. Yeah, let's do it. I don't know what's down there. Let's go that way. I'm just being random now. So anyway, God, that's pretty. I mean, talking about such a dark subject, but that is so cool. I mean, it's dark, it's gray, it's overcast, but seeing all that nice yellow hay offset from the gray and the hay bales, golly, that is awesome. I digress, sorry, get back to the subject. Hamas's charter states that they will never recognize Israel as a state. They will never recognize the ground that Israel was given by the UN, and they will never recognize the people that live there. For Hamas, and thus the people of Palestine, because they voted Hamas into power, and I'll talk about that here in a second, there is no two-state solution. There's only one state, and it's the Arab state, period. Full stop, that's what they want, nothing less will work. So it was 2006 that Hamas gained full control over Gaza. There was some political negotiating. There was the Palestinian Authority before Hamas, and they were moderates. They were willing to make peace with Israel. They actually went on record to say that Israel had a right to exist. And that upset the Arabs in the region, that upset a lot of people that did not want that. And so there was a general election, if you will, and the Palestinian Authority lost its seat of power in Palestine, and so Hamas won, surprisingly so, by a large margin. And so one has to say that the citizens of Palestine wanted Hamas to be in power. And that was in 2006, so what did they get for their vote? They got more hardship than they'd ever had, more of their people killed, because Hamas, in its war with Israel, sets up munitions, sets up rockets, sets up everything of war in schools, mosques, and hospitals. That, again, that's not conspiratorial, that's a fact. They've admitted it, we've known it, it's been in the news over and over and over again. So whenever Israel responds, as they should, to a rocket attack, what do they hit? They hit where the rockets are: schools, civilian buildings, mosques, every place that the Geneva Convention says you're not supposed to hit. But you know what? The Geneva Convention doesn't really apply here. That's against two warring armies, and Hamas is not an army, it's a terrorist group. But Israel, in its attempts to minimize civilian casualties, and drops leaflets and flyers and tells civilians that, hey, we're going to blow this place up, you need to leave. Hamas, on the other hand, and I just saw this again last night watching various, quote-unquote news outlets. Israel again says, we're going to come in, we're going to blow the place up, you need to go. And Hamas tells the Palestinian citizens that it's supposed to be ruling over to stay put. And of course, if they do and they die because Israel follows through with its threat, then Israel looks like an evil entity that's just bombing civilians at random, even though, historically, and that's not accurate. That's not accurate, never has been. Good God, where am I? I literally don't know where I am. So anyway, since Hamas has had full control over Gaza, regular rocket launches, regular, incursions, regular everything everything evil that can kill Israelis has been the norm. And consequently, Israel fires back. That's been the norm. So they've had this tit for tat for several years now. And so that brings us up to 2017. But Hamas makes this revised charter statements, kind of lightening up on its language. But right after that, and I saw the interview for this, a senior leader in Hamas says, yeah, great, we made that statement, but guess what? Nothing's changed. We still do not recognize Israel as a nation. We still do not recognize the land that they were given in 1948, and we do not recognize the people that moved there. So quite literally, Hamas has not changed its stance, and I don't see any time where they will ever change their stance. And I'm going to conclude my notes with this, and then I'm going to give you my personal thoughts. And you might be able to see this actually on screen too. 2021 Palestinian Center for Research and Policy and Survey research found that only 39% of Palestinians support a two-state solution. Okay, that means what? 61% do not. Conversely, a RAND survey basically found the same thing on the side of Israel. 60% of Israelis opposed a two-state solution. So it's pretty much even split, 60-40, and nobody wants a two-state solution. There's been so much bloodshed between these two places since 1948 that nobody realistically sees a two-state solution ever happening. There might have been a point where it could have happened, and that was with the Palestinian Authority. But you know who derailed that plan, that two-state solution? It was Hamas. I didn't have it in my notes, but I did remember reading it. Hamas threw a fit that they weren't part of the negotiations for the Muslim world, so the Palestinian Authority let them in, and the first thing Hamas did was derail the negotiations, and shortly after that, they in that election they claimed power. So I mean, what do you do? I mean, what do you do? All right, so I'm shutting off the phone now, and I'm just going to kind of randomly spew out my own thoughts on this. So first, whose land is it ultimately? I mean, I got to be fair and say, if you're talking strictly ancestral, it's a Jewish land. Period. They since 1400 BC, they've done they've been there. Now, were they exiled? Were they kicked out? Yes, yeah, they were. But they have the deepest roots between the two people groups. They have the deepest roots there, and in my mind have the legitimate claim based on ancestral origins. Based on conquest, guess what? The Muslims kept it, and they kept it. They took it and they kept it for a good little while. Do they deserve to be completely kicked out? Yes. And I'll tell you why. Because they refuse to live in peace. If they don't want to be equal partners with Israel, they want to be on top with Jewish citizens and anybody else not Muslim, secondary citizens. I would have a different stance if Arab Muslims legitimately wanted peace, legitimately wanted to cohabitate peacefully. But that's not the truth. That's not what they want. That's not what they're about. And this brings me to my next thought. The utter failure and stupidity of Western mindsets to think that these people in that region is ever going to think like we do. These are not people driven by materialism and political aspirations. They are driven by one thing and one thing only, and that's whatever's in the Quran and the other couple of books that they follow. They are a theocracy-driven people. They care nothing at all for our politics and our views of freedom and nationalism and things like that. They care nothing. They will say what they need to say to get by until they don't have to get by and they can exert power. That's just been the truth of how Islam works. I'm sorry, I know that's not popular. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's just the truth. And you saw that very clearly, in when they took over the Christian lands. Like, there was no Christian army. They didn't take any territory by force prior to the Crusades. And today there is no Christian army taking anything by force, fighting for the cause of Christ. You only see that in Islam. And so, because Islam does not desire peace, Islam loves death more than life, no, they can't be allowed to stay. That's not saying I'm a Zionist per se. I guess in a way I am, because I believe in the promises of God. And by the way, I totally avoided the spiritual underpinnings of this conversation as well. And there's a lot there. There's a lot going on in the spiritual aspect. I kind of kept this to the materialistic aspects. And I did that on purpose. But, you know, I really got it. But as far as this current conflict, man, I gotta wonder, you know, how did one of the most sophisticated intelligence gathering governments and militaries of the world, because they're surrounded by enemies, they know they are, they've been fighting all their lives ever since 1948 to keep their little patch of land theirs. You know, how did this attack happen and take them by surprise? This is a legitimate question. Is the Mossad and the intelligence gathering of Israel not as good as everyone has been made to believe? I mean, there's only two answers here. Either they knew and they let it, or they didn't know and they're not that good. You know, in terms of what's true, what's possible, and what's probable is kind of like how you measure this out, right? I think, anyway, at least for me. Is it possible the Mossad didn't know what was going on? Sure, anything's possible. Anybody can drop the ball, spill a cup of coffee, lean over under the desk to clean up the coffee and miss that all-important message that says, hey, we're about to get attacked. Is it probable, though? No, absolutely not. So many former IDF people have come out and said, look, there's no way this was unseen. A cat can't come up on the Israeli-Palestine border and not alert all kinds of sensors. And it's like stumbling on Area 51 and going across the fence and no one knowing about it. That just doesn't happen. And oh wow. I hope you can still hear me. I put up my visor, it's fogging up. You know, what happened, what Hamas does is horrible, but it's what they always do. They purposely target civilians. They admit it. They say it. Everybody knows it. And so there's no way I can be copacetic with anything looking like Palestinian freedom if that's the way they want to go about and getting it. That's why I say they gotta go. And they gotta go because that's what they say has to happen to Israel. At this point, in my heart, I believe the only way this gets resolved is if one of them gets completely obliterated and can't come back. It's because the Arabs. From 1948 on, they have been rejecting everything that would even look like peace. And so, you know, I'm sorry, but if they want war, then fine, give them war and then win. It's a bad situation. Now, for Israel, do I believe in a scorched earth policy where you go in and you just level everything on sight? No. Because, you know, as much as I don't necessarily believe in innocent civilians, and here's why. These people voted for Hamas, therefore they understood what Hamas was about, and, you know, they don't ever rise up against Hamas. This is why the theological idealism is far more important than political. Even if they disagree with Hamas and their tactics, they are all Muslims and they will not stand against each other. I just gotta say that there isn't an end to this, not a peaceful one. Western intervention does not help, never has, because we assume that they will want peace and that they will want freedom and that liberty is in the hearts of everyone, and it's not. What else I was going to say? You know, back in 49 to 67, there's a question that is just burning in my mind. Why didn't the other Muslims allow the Palestinian refugees come into their lands, assimilate with their own people, practice their religion any way they wanted, you know, the way their religious dictates say they should. Why did they box these people in? Not just the Egyptians, but all the Arab nations. Why did they box them in and not allow them to leave? Why? Was it because they knew that this kind of situation was going to result? You see, here's what I think about the Palestinian people as a group. These are the most generationally abused people I've ever seen in my life. The Arabs don't want them. Israelis certainly don't want them because they keep trying to kill Israelis. There can be, you know, what do you do when you're a people group and nobody wants you, but at the same time, you're utterly devoted to your medieval religion? What do you do with that? You know, how are you supposed to live with that? And furthermore, I gotta wonder, you know, the condition of the Palestinian people today. I mean, you know, back in 1948, 47, 49, you know, those years, they were a healthy, you know, population reproducing like normal. But if Palestinians aren't allowed to leave, and I seriously doubt there's a migration problem in Palestine where people are trying to get in. I don't think that's real. So what about their reproduction? I mean, as a human, as a species? It's a legitimate question. I think there's probably a lot of inter-family inbreeding going on that just isn't avoidable if you want to continue on, right? I feel for them from my heart because they're just the world's pawns. They have suffered greatly because of that. But Israel isn't going to give up its ancestral lands. In fact, if it had its way, it would take it all back, I'm sure. And Muslims are not going to give up their conquered lands, and they've already stated they want their way, which is to take it all back. They have this slogan, from sea to river. And so when you have these mentalities in play, then you know what? There's no peace deal that's going to be reached. There can't be. Because nobody is willing to give. Israel says it will, and I believe it probably would. They have more of a Western mentality about them. If they can live and let live, they will. But quit trying to kill them. If you want peace, quit trying to kill them. Like I said, I'm not saying Israel's perfect. I'm not saying Israel's done everything right. That's stupid and foolish, and it's not true. But if one party even says, yeah, I'm willing to work for peace, then there's a chance, right? Only if the other party says, well, okay, let's work for peace. Then you have a real possibility. But the Muslims absolutely will not. They will not work for peace, and that's why this conflict is playing out the way that it is. They don't want peace. They don't want an equal state. They want dominance, and that's it. That's period. That's all they want. They got to go. There's no chance for a peaceful solution for them. That's just my opinion. That's my take. And believe me, I know that's not popular. That's not a popular take at all. And I'm not trying to be popular. I'm just trying to be honest with the information that I've gathered and read. Like I said, a huge chunk of it isn't even in this video. And this is not an easy situation. It's not an easily talked about. It's not an easily figured out. It's not something that you're going to just fix. It's unfixable. Anyway, that's what I believe. That's what I think. And it's not as easy as I laid out. There's so much more going on. And I wish there was a solution that was peaceful. There isn't. There just isn't. That's all I got. You know, I know this was kind of a bummer, kind of a gray day with a gray topic, but it's something that needed to be talked about, something I wanted to express some thoughts on. Looking at the history, looking at how things are going, looking at the unyieldingness of Muslims, and you know, the stubbornness of Israel to just not die. You know, there is no peaceful solution to this. And I hope whatever war happens over there to settle this thing once and for all doesn't consume us all. That's all I've got. I think I'm just going to enjoy my ride back home from wherever it is I'm at. And like I said, don't get mad if you don't agree with me. Just understand, man, I'm just a dude on a bike in the middle of nowhere. And I'm just talking in my helmet right now. Anyways, talk at you later. Be another video coming out soon of actual motorcycle content this time. See you then.